I want you to picture this. You are on an operating table. Your hands are shaking so badly that a nurse has to reach over and hold them still, just to keep you from moving during the surgery. Your blood pressure is dropping. Somewhere behind the curtain, a surgeon's voice has gone sharp and fast in a way that tells you, even through the haze, that something is wrong. And in that moment, the moment you need your family more than you have ever needed them in your life, you call your mother, and all you hear is her voicemail. Not her voice. Her voicemail. Hi, this is Felipa. Leave a message. 4 times. 4 times I called, and 4 times I got a recording instead of my mother. I hung up before the beep, because what exactly was I supposed to say? Mom, I'm having complications. The baby's heart rate just dropped. And there is not one single person who shares my blood anywhere in this building. My name is Saffron Cray, and 11 hours before I heard those words, I believed I understood exactly where I stood in my family. By the end of this story, I will have picked up a phone and undone $47,000 of trust in less time than it takes to microwave a cup of coffee. And I will not regret a single second of it. But you need to understand what came before, or none of what I did will make any sense at all. I am 31 years old, and I grew up the older of 2 daughters in a house in Ohio where affection always felt like it was rationed, like there was only so much of it to go around, and my younger sister Mon got the larger share every single time. It was never dramatic, not at first. It was quieter than that, and somehow that made it worse. It was the birthday photos where I got cropped out because I'd made an odd face at the wrong moment. It was report cards where my A's earned a nod, and Mon's CS earned a party. It was my father calling my sister the light of the house at a family dinner while I sat 2 feet away, holding a casserole dish I had spent 3 hours making, waiting for someone to notice. I used to believe that if I just achieved enough, gave enough, helped enough, the scale would eventually tip in my direction. So I became the daughter who remembered every anniversary, who drove 2 hours to fix her mother's laptop, who quietly paid for her father's cardiologist visit the year his insurance lapsed. I told myself it was love. Some of it was. But if I'm honest with you now, in a way I never let myself be honest back then. Some small hopeful part of me believed that generosity was a language they would eventually learn to speak back to me. Do you know that feeling? The one where you keep setting the table, certain that this time, someone will finally sit down. There is one memory that still comes back to me sometimes, from when I was 17. I had made the state finals for a debate tournament, the kind of thing that felt enormous to me at the time, and my parents promised they would be there. That morning, my sister called them in tears because a boy she liked hadn't texted her back all weekend. And when I stepped up to the podium for the final round, the 2 seats we had reserved for my parents were still empty. I won that round anyway. I remember scanning the room afterward out of pure habit, already knowing exactly what I would find. Nothing. I told myself it didn't matter. I have told myself that about a great many things for a very long time, and I got remarkably good at believing it. But some debts don't stay quiet forever, and this story is about the moment mine finally came due. 3 years before the night that changed everything, my parents called me in a full panic. They were behind on their mortgage after my father's small business took a hit, and the bank was sending letters with words like delinquent and acceleration in them. They didn't ask my sister. Mon has never held a job longer than 8 months, and everyone in the family has quietly agreed never to bring that up. They asked me. We wouldn't ask if we had any other option, my mother said, her voice cracking in a way I had rarely heard from her. We could lose the house, Saffron. Your father hasn't slept in a week. My father got on the line after her, quieter than I had ever heard him. I'm ashamed to even be asking you this. And for one unguarded moment, hearing him sound that small, I forgot every cropped photo, every party thrown for my sister while I got a nod. I just wanted to fix it, the way I had always wanted to fix things for them. $47,000 was almost everything my husband Emery and I had saved toward a home of our own. 6 years of renting, watching the market climb further out of reach every quarter, for years of packed lunches and cancelled vacations and Emery taking on weekend freelance work just to build that number. When my parents asked, I didn't say yes right away. I asked Emery first, because it was our money, not just mine. He is a careful man, an accountant by trade, And he ran the numbers twice before he finally looked at me and said, "If we do this, we do it properly. Paperwork. Terms. Not a handshake." I agreed. We had my parents sign a private promissory note, drawn up by an actual attorney, structured as a soft second lien recorded with their mortgage lender, so it would surface in any future title search. A modest interest rate. A 10-year repayment window. And one clause my attorney insisted on, one I barely paid attention to at the time, an acceleration provision, allowing the full remaining balance to be called due immediately, at my sole discretion, if certain conditions were ever met. I remember my mother crying what looked like grateful tears when we handed over the check. My father hugged me longer than he had in a decade. For a few months after that, I actually let myself believe something had shifted. They called more. They asked how I was doing, not just how the money was doing. I let myself believe the scale had finally tipped. It hadn't. It had simply been recalibrated, quietly, to remind me exactly what my usefulness was worth. Keep that clause in the back of your mind. It matters more than you know yet. 2 years into that loan, I got pregnant, and it was not an easy pregnancy. A marginal placenta previa my doctor watched closely from 16 weeks. Gestational hypertension that crept in around week 30. Modified activity restrictions, then stricter ones. Then full bed rest at 34 weeks after a scan showed the placenta hadn't moved the way we had hoped. My obstetrician told me plainly that a C-section was very likely, and that given the previa and my blood pressure numbers, it needed to happen somewhere equipped for a fast surgical response if anything escalated. Emory took every one of those appointments seriously in a way that occasionally embarrassed me, showing up with a legal pad of questions, researching hospital response times, quietly rearranging his schedule around my due date months in advance so he would never be more than a few hours from home. He didn't say much about fear out loud. He just prepared for the worst in every practical way he knew, and some nights, that was the only thing that let me sleep at all. I told my parents everything, in detail, because some instinct in me wanted them prepared, wanted them present. "Of course, honey, we'll be there," my mother said. "You just focus on staying calm," my father said. "We've got you." I believed them, because believing them had become a reflex I hadn't examined in years. And around that same time, my sister announced she was engaged and pregnant herself, for months behind me, and my parents began planning her baby shower with an intensity one had genuinely never seen directed at anything involving me. Group texts about venues. Centerpiece mood boards. My mother driving 90 minutes to a specialty bakery because my sister wanted a very particular shade of blush pink frosting. I noticed. Of course I noticed. But I told myself it was fine, because showers are supposed to be fun, and my situation was medical, and surely medical would outrank a party when it actually mattered. Surely. The moment came 3 weeks early, on a Thursday afternoon in April, when my blood pressure spiked during a routine check, and my doctor took one look at the numbers and told me I was being admitted immediately. Emory was 2 states away at a client meeting and caught the next flight, but flights are not instant, and this was not a situation where we could wait for him to land. My surgery was scheduled for that evening. I called my mother first, my hands already shaking with a very particular kind of fear. "Mom, they're taking me in for the C-section tonight. It's happening now. Can you come?" There was a pause. And in the background, laughter. Glasses clinking. Someone mentioning a diaper cake. "Honey, we're right in the middle of Mon's shower. Can it wait until tomorrow morning?" "It cannot wait," I told her. "It is an emergency." Another pause, longer this time. And then that particular flatness in her voice, the one she uses when a conversation is already over in her mind. "Saffron, we drove 90 minutes for this bakery order. We can't just leave. You'll be fine. You always make it sound worse than it is." I called my father next, hoping, foolishly, for something different. I got exactly the same wall. "Your mother says it's not that serious. We'll swing by tomorrow, sweetheart, once things calm down here." I stared at my phone afterward, at that small green-ended call screen, and felt something crack open in my chest that had nothing to do with my blood pressure numbers. I called Emory. No signal. Somewhere over the Midwest. And then, out of options, I called my best friend, Delphine. She didn't ask a single unnecessary question. She just said, I'm coming. And 40 minutes later, she was there, still in her work clothes, holding my hand in a scratchy hospital gown while nurses hooked me to monitors. "Where are your parents?" she asked gently, glancing at the door. "At a bakery," I said, and heard exactly how strange it sounded out loud, how small and absurd it looked next to the machines beeping beside me. Delphine didn't say anything unkind about them. She just held my hand tighter and said, "Then I'm not going anywhere." And I remember thinking, with a strange cold clarity that cut through even the fear, they picked frosting over me. They picked a party over their daughter's operating table. And the person holding my hand through it didn't share a single drop of my blood. The surgery moved faster than anyone expected, and not in a good way. My daughter was delivered safely, 7 pounds 12 ounces, a full head of dark hair, and for one shining moment I heard her cry and felt something like relief crack through the fear. But almost immediately after, my blood pressure dropped hard, and the entire tone in that room shifted from calm efficiency to something sharp and urgent. I heard numbers called out that made the anesthesiologist move closer to my head, murmuring reassurance I did not fully believe. My vision narrowed at the edges, like the room was closing in through a tunnel. And the last thing I heard clearly, before everything went soft and distant, was my surgeon, Dr. Castellane, speaking not to me but to the team around her, her voice tight and fast. "She's losing more than we'd expect. Get me another unit ready. We need to move now. What happens next changes everything you think you know about this family, and it starts the moment I woke up." I don't remember much of what came after in real detail. What I remember is waking up groggy, machines beeping steadily, and Emery's face the first thing I focused on, still in his travel clothes, his eyes red from crying and from the flight. He had landed to a string of missed calls and a voicemail from Delphine telling him to get to the hospital as fast as humanly possible, and he told me later he ran through the airport parking garage so fast he nearly left the car door hanging open behind him. By the time he reached the surgical floor, I was already in recovery, and a nurse had to walk him through what happened, because I wasn't lucid enough yet to do it myself. He told me that Dr. Castellane had found him in the waiting area once things stabilized, and said something to him that shook him so badly he repeated it to me almost word for word. We had a real scare in there. Another 20 minutes of delay could have had serious consequences. You should know how close this was. Emery said his legs simply stopped holding him up after she walked away, and he sat down hard in one of those waiting room chairs. Close. That word sat in my chest like a stone for days. Close to not meeting my daughter. Close to Emery raising her alone. Close, while my parents ate cake and admired centerpieces 90 minutes away, choosing not to come because a bakery order felt more urgent than their daughter's operating table. My parents did show up the next morning, breezing into my hospital room with a gift bag and a stuffed rabbit, acting as though the previous night had been a minor inconvenience rather than a night I very nearly did not survive. My mother cooed over the baby, admired her hair, and spent a full 5 minutes recounting how well the shower had gone, how the frosting turned out exactly the right shade of blush pink after all. She said it the way you describe a pleasant weekend, with no apparent awareness she was saying it to the daughter who had been fighting for her life across town while it happened. When I finally found my voice and asked why they hadn't come, my father said the sentence that ended something in me permanently. "Saffron, you always make everything about you. Your sister needed us there for something we couldn't reschedule. You were going to be fine. You're always fine. You're the strong one, remember." That phrase had been used on me my entire life, a compliment and a leash at the same time. Being the strong one meant I didn't get to need anyone. Being the strong one meant my emergencies could be rescheduled around someone else's centerpieces. I looked at my father's face, waiting for some flicker of doubt, some recognition of how it sounded out loud in a hospital room with an 4 still taped to my arm. There wasn't one. He believed every word of it, and that told me the problem had never been one missed night. It was the entire architecture of how this family decided who deserved showing up for. I didn't argue. I thanked them for the rabbit and let them leave believing everything between us was fine. But that night, alone with my daughter asleep in the bassinet and Emery dozing in the recliner, I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I reread the promissory note. I found the acceleration clause my attorney had insisted on, the one allowing me to call the full remaining balance due at my sole discretion, under specified conditions, one of which was simply my good faith determination that the relationship underlying the informal trust of the loan had been materially breached. I had imagined using it once, years ago, only in case they tried to sell the house without repaying me, or vanished, or defaulted. I had never imagined using it for this. But I thought about the frosting. I thought about you always make it about you. I thought about Dr. Castellane's voice saying another 20 minutes could have had serious consequences. And I thought, with a clarity that felt less like anger and more like arithmetic finally balancing out after 31 years, if I am not family enough to matter in an emergency, I am not family enough to keep subsidizing a house I nearly didn't live to see again. The next morning, still in a hospital gown, still with lines taped to the back of my hand, I called my attorney. And what happened over the next 45 days would either bring my parents to their senses, or show me, once and for all, exactly what I had always suspected but never let myself believe. I read him the acceleration clause over the phone and asked plainly whether I had grounds. He asked careful questions about what had happened, about the terms we had signed, and then told me he believed I did, but that it needed to go through the proper channels to hold up legally. He drafted a formal notice of default and acceleration that same day, giving my parents a legal window of 45 days to pay the balance in full, refinance the property, or reach a new arrangement before any further process tied to the recorded lien could begin. The notice went out by certified mail 2 days later. I want to be honest with you about something, because I think it matters. This was never really about the money in some cold, transactional way. Emery and I could have survived without ever seeing that $47,000 again, and part of me had genuinely been prepared to let it go quietly as an expensive lesson about who my parents were. What changed was not the money. What changed was discovering that in the one moment I truly needed them, the scale I had spent my whole life trying to balance had never existed at all. There had only ever been one side of it, and it had never once been mine. The notice reached my parents 4 days later. My mother called screaming, the word betrayal used more times in that single call than I think she had used in her entire life directed at anyone else. My father sent a long message accusing me of trying to destroy the family, of being vindictive, of proving once and for all that I did, in fact, make everything about myself. I let both calls go to voicemail. When I finally called my mother back 2 days later, my voice came out. Calm in a way that seemed to unsettle her far more than shouting ever would have. You had 90 minutes to spare for a bakery order the night I suffered serious complications during emergency surgery, I said. I am not being vindictive. I am recognizing that the trust that loan was built on doesn't exist anymore. You have 45 days to refinance, sell, or find another way to cover it. But I am done being the daughter who funds a family I only qualify to be part of when it's convenient. She tried softer, then. We didn't know it was that serious, Saffron. You should have called again, made it clearer. I told her I didn't know what clearer sounded like than an emergency C-section. There was a long silence, and then, quietly, almost to herself, she said the sentence that told me everything I would ever need to know. Your sister needed us. It wasn't that they hadn't understood how serious it was. It was that even understanding it, they had made a choice, and the choice had never once been me. The weeks that followed were their own kind of education. My father tried to enlist extended family to pressure me into reversing it, calling an aunt who called me directly to suggest I was punishing my parents out of postpartum hormones, a phrase I found almost impressively insulting in how many ways it managed to dismiss me at once. I told her evenly that I had suffered serious complications while my parents chose a party, and that if she wanted to discuss hormones, she was welcome to discuss it with my surgeon. My sister sent one single text. Thanks for ruining everyone's week over drama that has nothing to do with me. Which told me she had learned exactly the lesson our parents spent 30 years teaching her. That my needs were background noise to be managed, never addressed. At a cousin's cookout weeks later, my aunt cornered me by the drink table and told me that families work things out privately, that involving a bank made me just like a stranger to them. I asked her calmly whether she had been in that operating room the night things took a dangerous turn. She hadn't. I asked whether she knew my surgeon's exact words to my husband in that waiting room. She didn't. Then you're missing the part of the story that matters, I told her, and walked away before she could answer. I think that unsettled her more than anything I could have said. The twist I never saw coming arrived a month later, when my sister called me directly for the first time since the hospital, her voice smaller than I had ever heard it. She wasn't calling to apologize. She was calling because her fiancé's family had backed out of covering part of the wedding, and she wanted to know, tentatively, almost testing the water, whether Emery and I might help just this once. For one flickering moment, old habits nearly answered for me, the reflex of the daughter who filled every gap in this family without ever being asked to. But my own voice came out steady instead. Mon, I went through serious complications the night you needed cake frosting more than you needed me in a hospital. I love you, but I am not the emergency fund anymore, not for you, not for anyone in this family. She hung up without saying goodbye. I did not chase the call. For the first time in my life, letting silence sit between my sister and me didn't feel like failure. It felt like the first honest boundary either of us had ever actually respected. I did not reverse the acceleration. My parents, faced with the reality of the recorded lien, ended up refinancing through a new lender at far less favorable terms than they'd have gotten years earlier, using it to pay out the note in full over the following 2 months. It was not comfortable for them. I know it strained their budget in ways they complained about to anyone who would listen. I felt something when I heard that, but it wasn't guilt. It was the strange quiet relief of no longer being financially tethered to people who had shown me, in the clearest possible terms, exactly how little that tether meant to them when it counted. I did not attend the rescheduled shower dinner my mother tried to organize as a chance to reconnect. I sent a card when my niece was born, because that baby didn't choose any of this and deserves better than inherited grudges, but I did not go to the hospital, and I was never added back to the family group chat that continued on without me. My mother has called several times since, alternating between apology and accusation depending on her mood that day. My father sent one message months later that came closer to real reflection than anything before it. I know we let you down that night. I don't know how to fix it. I haven't answered it yet. I might someday. Not because the debt between us has been repaid, but because that is a very different kind of ledger than the one I closed with a phone call from a hospital bed. At my 6-week postpartum checkup, Dr. Castellane asked how I was healing, and then, almost as an aside while reviewing my chart, said something that has stayed with me since. That night stuck with me, she said. We don't always get to see how these stories end for our patients once they leave the hospital. I hope whatever needed to change around you changed. I told her it had. She nodded the way people do when they've seen enough hard nights to recognize the shape of one finally closing, and moved on to check my incision without making it a bigger moment than it needed to be. 30 seconds, at most. And it has stayed with me longer than almost anything my own parents said to me that entire year. What I've built instead, in the months since, is something smaller and steadier. Emery and I are saving again, slower this time, but without that constant undertow of wondering whether the money would ever really come back to us in any form other than resentment. My daughter is 7 months old now, and when I hold her at 2 in the morning, feeding her in the quiet dark, I think about the promise I've made to her without ever saying it out loud, that she will never have to compete with a bakery order for my attention in an emergency. That if she is ever on an operating table, I will move heaven and every scheduled event on my calendar to be there, because that is what the word family is actually supposed to mean, not what I spent 31 years mistaking it for. I think about Dr. Castellane's voice sometimes, that flat, urgent, we need to move now. And I understand now that it was never just about the surgery. It was the moment my whole life reorganized itself around a simpler, harder truth. That love which only shows up when it is convenient was never really love at all. Just a very long, very expensive rehearsal for the day I would finally stop performing for it. I spent 31 years believing that if I just gave enough, the people who raised me would eventually give back in the same currency. What I have learned instead is that some people will only ever meet you halfway if the other half costs them nothing. And the moment it does cost them something, you find out exactly where you rank. I don't say that with the bitterness I might have a year ago. I say it now the way you describe a fact of weather, something you've simply learned to dress for. I still send my parents a photo of my daughter now and then, because I don't want her growing up entirely without them, and because some doors are worth leaving cracked, even after you've stopped waiting for anyone to walk back through them on your terms. But the version of me who would drain her own savings twice, who would drive 2 hours for a laptop and get nothing back but a passing nod. That version stayed behind in that hospital room. What walked out instead was someone who finally understood that being the strong one was never a compliment. It was a job description nobody ever asked if I wanted. So here is what I keep coming back to, and maybe you have an answer I don't. If the people who are supposed to show up for you the most only show up when it costs them nothing, were they ever really there for you at all? Or were they only ever there for what you could give them?